Yeah, so when Brett, and he may have altered this since then, but when he says the entire first century is void of the New Testament Jesus, there be some things I'd want him to ask his opinion on. I'm going to comment on each of these, and maybe he can go back and do the ones he wants to talk about. First of all, it seems the entire New Testament was written within the first century, and we even have, it seems now, manuscripts from within the first century itself, if Dan Wallace is to be believed. But either way, the entire first century, the entire New Testament is done by then. So it seems weird to say it's void of Jesus, especially the NT Jesus, when NT Jesus is all composed within the first century. So we have the fragments. Further, we have non-canonical Christian writings, specifically, at the very least, Clement of Rome wrote around 96 from the Roman Church to the Corinthian Church, and mentions several things about Jesus, some of which have to do with the historical reality of him. So I guess the next one there says empirical evidence. I guess I'd want to see what he means by that. There's one place where I read where he says if we saw Jesus's house, then that would be helpful. That seems a little odd to me. I'm not really sure how, even if we did see his house, what exactly that would prove, or how we really know what that is, but I'm not sure what he means by that. Then circumstantial evidence, fingerprints, DNA, the cross he was nailed to. I guess I'd want to ask Brett, from the first century, whose fingerprints and DNA do we have? Do we have anyone's fingerprints or DNA? The cross he was nailed to. Another question would be, how many people do we have remains of that were crucifixion victims, even though we know it was a common practice? The actual answer is rather interesting. We only have one. In 1970, we discovered a guy, Yohanan, and we've got evidence of the crucifixion victim because we've got his ossuary, and we can tell he was crucified just the way the New Testament describes. And so it seems strange to say, well, what about Jesus's specific crucifixion remnants? You can't do a miracle to back any of your Christian claims and beliefs. I'll let that one just stand for now. 2 billion Christians can get on their knees right now and beg for Jesus to appear in the air and nothing will happen. I guess my question would be, are we supposed to be able to do that? Because I'm not sure if I remember seeing that as a promise or anything in the New Testament that if we all did that, that would happen. So I don't understand how that's an irrefutable point against Christianity. Then all the stuff about everything being 100% hypothetical in regards to history, I guess my question would be, to Brett, does that include what he says about Jesus, that we can't know anything about him? Is that also 100% hypothetical? Because he's making a statement about Jesus in history as well. And then the last thing, he's just saying his tactics cannot be defeated. I don't really have a comment on that. So, I mean, that would be my quick commentary on that list, or if Brett just wants to comment on my comments.
Well, you said a lot, but I'm going to put it down in a nutshell, Vocab.
Sure.
That I'm not speaking opinion. I'm not making claims. I'm speaking 100% fact. That everything you say about Jesus as a mere man or as a miracle worker is an hypothesis. Because the very definition of historical, ancient historian is they use a hypothesis. If you look at ancient historian, William Lane Craig, whatever, they would tell you, yes, we take data that we find and we form a hypothesis. So that's how ancient historical information is gathered, through hypothesis. That is a category fact. So when you talk about Jesus, at any manner, you're stuck in the hypothesis zone, because that is how ancient history is done, through hypothesis. And that's J.P. Moreland. Even William Lane Craig, real quick, even William Lane Craig said, yes, imagination plays an important role in reconstructing Jesus. And even Michael Licona said that some of his peers, are very minute, but some of his peers admit that what they do as ancient historians is fiction. It's just interpretation. It's just believing what you want to believe, because there's no data to back anything. You only have imagination, hypothesis. So that's a fact.
Okay.
I mean, he seems to be saying it's an impossibility to know anything for certain about ancient history.
Yeah, Brett, are you saying that?
This is what both Mike Licona and
but Brett,
Gary Habermas, they both said the same thing.
Right. So
when we look at ancient history, we're not talking about certainty for sure. Even William Lane Craig says, he goes, if we're talking about ancient historians, we are not talking about absolute certainty. We're not even talking about the certainty of the Civil War. We're talking about something much, much less. And that's William Lane Craig, when he's faced with a student who said, how sure are you about this Jesus resurrection stuff? He goes, if we're talking about, as an historian, we're not talking about something that is certain as today, not even the Civil War. Even Bart Ehrman, who believes Jesus lived as a man, said, if you want to compare ancient history to how we do history today, you cannot say anything about the Bible. That's how bad the Bible is and how bad ancient history is. That if we use modern methods that we use today for history, the Bible, you can't say anything about it. So Bart Ehrman says, we want to know about the Bible. So what? Let me tell your readers what ancient historians do, like Bart Ehrman, Gary Habermas, William Lane Craig. These guys get together and they create their own methods, their own dogmas to be able to say something is a historical fact. See, this is their own creation. But their own creation is all hypothesis. So when you hear a historical fact, everyone listening, the next time you hear a historical fact about Jesus, it's a hypothesis. It's a dirty little secret that William Lane Craig doesn't want to admit in public. But every time you hear a historical fact about Jesus, what you're actually hearing is a hypothesis, because a hypothesis is a historical fact.
Much to think about, much to discuss. Any quick comments, Bob or Vocab?
Yeah, Brett, if you don't think we can know anything about the first century, why are you even bringing up that it would help to have the cross Jesus was nailed to?
Because Caesar Augustus, we do have coins. We do have
Brett,
a 4,000 word inscription upon his death. That we can say, okay, we do have these things from that time period that he was alive. So we can say, hey, you know.
All right, Brett. We'll let's hold on to that thought. We'll be right back. Backpack Radio.
Backpack Radio. Radio for people who like hard espresso and strong theology.
Hey, welcome back to Backpack Radio. We are on with Brett Strong. His website is jesusisahoax.blogspot.com. Let's get back into this. At the end of the last segment, Brett, you were making a point about first century evidence and talking about how I guess that there's coins, right, that attest to Caesar. You want to develop that point a little bit more?
Well, we got coins that are dated to the time of Caesar Augustus. We have a 4,000 word inscription upon his death. So those things, one could surmise that Caesar Augustus did live, and I have no problem with that.
Brett, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
For what reason do you think Jesus could even possibly have coins with his inscription or imprint on them?
Well, if you're talking about the New Testament Jesus, you're talking about a on paper storybook character that did 50,000 miracles, a guy who was followed by the masses, a guy who raised a zombie from the grave, gave his disciples power to raise zombies from the grave. He was wanted by the Jewish government. He was crucified by the Roman government.
Stop right there.
All those things, you want to think that there would be some type of evidence from that amazing 3-year run.
Crucified by the Roman government. Brett, would they make coins in his honor?
No, not coins. But something.
But why bring up coins then?
There should be some artifact. That's what I mean.
But why do you bring up coins if you know Rome is not likely to make an inscription in honor of an executed criminal for sedition? Why bring up coins? It's very disingenuous.
Artifact basis only. That's all I'm talking about, Vocab.
But why bring up coins?
That we have artifacts of Caesar Augustus. We have nothing of Jesus. So the coin thing doesn't work because, from my view, I'm just talking about an artifact. Anything from Jesus.
Okay.
We have totally nothing in all of history from Jesus.
But I'm just saying it's disingenuous to bring up something that you know wouldn't be possible. Now, you bring up fingerprints and DNA.
It's an artifact. When I say coin, let me clarify. When I say coin, I mean an artifact. I'm not talking about it has to be a coin, okay?
Well, then why say coin? Say something
that's an artifact, Vocab. The reason why you're sticking on this coin, because you don't have anything about Jesus. He doesn't exist in the era he's supposed to exist. So you're sticking to this coin, which to me is a weak response, when I'm telling you it's an artifact. That's it. You're making more out of a coin than I'm saying. So your weakness, and you're trying to stand on something that I'm not standing on.
The reason why I bring it up is because it's disingenuous to mention it if it's something that actually can't happen. You can never have coins. Although we do have a Super Mario Brother coin in the house.
Artifact, you keep saying I've explained myself. Since I explained myself,
I got you.
You must go with my explanation.
Okay.
You can't keep referring to something when I just explained it. But you're doing it because you have a weak response because you have nothing to offer. And
Okay.
I'm here to show the world you don't.
Brett, are you saying that it would be impossible to prove Jesus just because he was an ancient figure and we don't have these artifacts? Is that your just yes or no? Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it's impossible to prove that Jesus lived. You can form a hypothesis. That's what ancient historians do. So, yeah, you can form an hypothesis about Jesus, space aliens, black holes, but you can't prove those things.
Why do you assume then, and maybe I'll turn it back to Vocab, that the stuff that we do have, i.e. the New Testament documents and other writings, are fabrications that are wrong? I mean, why could they? Aren't they a testimony to Jesus? The New Testament itself?
Of Jesus. They're anonymous, they're unsigned, they're undated, and we have nothing close to an original.
Hey, Brett, when Paul starts his letter and says, I, Paul, servant of Jesus Christ, would you define that as anonymous? Or when it's...
No. See, we don't have anything original.
But I'm just saying, like, the words you use...
Paul did not write it. A unknown scribe wrote that decades and centuries later.
How do you know that?
When you say I, Paul, then you're not you're making a hypothesis because we don't have anything from Paul's hand. So when you even
I,
make that
Paul,
statement,
write these
you're
letters
making
to you.
a
My own hand.
hypothetical statement.
Brett, how do you know that? What makes you say that? Could you please prove that Paul's letters are all forgeries, all 13 of them?
I didn't say they were forgeries.
Well,
I
if you're
said
saying
we
someone
have
else wrote it in
nothing
his
from Paul.
name, that's a forgery.
I am not saying it's a forgery. I am saying that you're making a hypothetical statement, and that's a fact. I'm not even saying it. I'm pointing out fact. You're making a hypothetical statement because we have nothing from Apostle Paul's hands. So all you can do is surmise, imagine, make a hypothetical statement.
Well,
that's what ancient history is, hypothesis.
Well, Brent, if I can ask a quick question. I know I'm supposed to be a host, but I just want to jump in real quick and ask. So let's just follow this train of thought. You said, all we can do is make hypothetical statements. Obviously, hypotheses have to be tested and determined, and some hypotheses sort of fall to the ground. Others are deemed more credible. So I'm curious in terms of then, given your statement that this is all a hypothesis, then what would make it more credible in your mind? Is it only simply we find artifacts, or are there other ways in which ancient historians essentially test hypotheses, according to using your words, that help make a hypothesis more certain rather than less certain?
Well, first of all, hypotheses are never certain. Mike LaCorne would tell you that. William Lane Craig would tell you that. A hypothesis is never certain.
I said more certain rather than less certain.
Now restate that again.
Okay. What he's saying is, in your mind, what evidence would be presented that would make the New Testament Jesus hypothesis more certain than it is now? That's what he's saying.
If you found something that's dated within the time frame of Jesus, I mean, that right there would settle the issue for me. Like, okay, this guy's real. We found something during this time period that said, hey, Jesus walked the earth and he had disciples. No problem.
So, Brett,
first of all, I don't have a problem even believing that there was a historical Jesus. I have no problem.
Right.
The problem is the Superman Jesus of the Gospels. If you want to say that there was a historical man that walked the earth and he died and his body was eaten by dogs, that's very plausible. I would not argue that. I go, that's a hypothesis too, but it's very plausible. But if you're going to say the New Testament Jesus is plausible, then I'm going to say, then you just defy science, you defy modern medicine, you defy the common human experience, because that guy is fiction.
Okay, Brett, do you think that miracles are possible?
No, miracles are, okay, first of all, when we say miracles, what do you mean by it? Because there's miracles like, somebody can have a tumor, next day to take a x-ray and it's gone.
A miracle, the kind of miracles.
Water, no.
Okay, so Brett, then you have a presupposition that if you, even looking at history, there's no way you could accept any of the miraculous acts by Jesus. So it's not like this is a case that you look at without bias or anything. I just want people to see that. Thank you for being honest about it, but so you have this bias against the supernatural, so no historical event with a miracle in your mind supposedly could be historical by definition.
Well, first of all, I'm not biased towards miracles. They're just fiction. But if anybody could walk on water, I'll be more than happy to renounce my position and say, wow, I was wrong. But no one can bring forth that to science and say, this guy's walking on warm bath water. So it's not bias, it's a fact. It's not even an opinion. It's a fact. And if you could bring someone walking on water, vocab, I would be more than happy to renounce it. Me and you both know you can't. So all miracles, by nature, are hypothesis fiction.
Well, there's a topic that's worth exploring some more. We are on with Brett Strong, talking about is the New Testament Jesus fiction. Look forward to talking some more. Backpack Radio.
From the classroom seat to the inner city street.
Backpack Radio.
Always loving those beats.
Backpack Radio.
Welcome back to Backpack Radio. We are on with Brett Strong, discussing this topic, is the New Testament Jesus fiction. It's been a good debate so far, a good discussion on a number of different areas. We ended the last segment talking really about this sort of area of miracles and some other related issues.
Okay, well, we did end up the last section talking about miracles, and there seems to be, again, this divide between Brett and Vocab that I don't know how we can possibly chasm. But here's another quote from our guest, Brett Strong. How could the entire world's history of 3 BC to 30 AD be totally silent of what the Bible claims as the, quote, Superman, super famous Jesus? The answer is a simple one. According to Brett, the New Testament storybook Jesus, with his on-paper Marvel comic book superhero powers and his on-paper Michael Jackson be mobbed nearly everywhere as he went in fame, is all a hoax from ancient times. Sorry, Christians, but the truth is the truth. Jesus, the flying superhero of the New Testament, is a hoax from ancient times. Vocab.
Yeah, so we see that Brett does, I mean, he says he doesn't have a bias on one hand, but then on the other hand, he says that anything that's miraculous is fiction. And, even if miracles were to be understood some other way, historians who are good historians don't say, oh, this account has something supernatural in it, therefore we throw it out. A really famous one is before Caesar crosses the Rubicon, Suetonius has this little line in here where he says an apparition appeared on the lake or the river before they went across. But historians don't discount the entire thing because there's something, it seems, supernatural that Suetonius reports. So it's really bad history what Brett is doing. Number one, to have this sort of baby with the bathwater. And secondly, it's a philosophical bias, not sound, proper historical methodology that leads somebody to say anything with the miraculous, by definition, is fiction. That's what I would say to how we ended up our last segment.
Brett, would you like to respond to that?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, Vocab, you have it wrong, absolutely. And I'll show you right now as far as Bart Ehrman was debating Mike Latonin. And he told Mike Latonin, ancient historians do not do miracles. They just don't do it. When you do miracles as an ancient historian, you're doing theology. You're not doing ancient history. And he pointed out again and again to Mike Latona that when you do miracles, Mike, you're doing theology. You're not doing ancient history. So, Vocab, I'm going to have to call you on that. That even speaking at a scholarly level, you are absolutely wrong. Ancient history does not do miracles. They do ancient history. A miracle is theology only. And any ancient historian doing his job can only stick to something that's not miraculous.
Hey,
that's
Brett.
Bart Ehrman, and that's the way it is.
Is it a theological...
I don't know. You got your information wrong.
Is it a theological statement for someone to say miracles don't happen?
No, that's a fact. That's not a theological statement. That's a fact. Theology is something whimsical. It's something of the imagination. I'm speaking facts. Because if you're going to say miracles are going to happen, as a theologian, I'm more than happy to accept it if you can prove it. But if you can't prove it, then Vocab, you're stuck in fantasy world. And that's okay for you. And it's okay.
Well, Brett, but you see, again, this gets back to this chasm that I'm not sure that we can get together. But,
no.
Brett, are you saying that the study of God, by definition, is fantasy? That's what theology is. That by definition can't be anything but fantasy?
So that theology, to me, is fantasy. That's my personal. Ancient historian studies hypothesis, that's the scholarly term, the definition. But as far as theology, that's my personal definition. It's fantasy, because it can't be proven on any empirical level. So it's just fantasy, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, or Hindu, it's just fantasy.
It can't be proven by your standards, but could it be true?
Any religious God? No.
Okay. Well, Brett, it's interesting.
I haven't seen it, so.
Even Jesus' enemies seem to attest to his miracle-working power. Famous examples from the Babylonian Talmud. Now, these are oral tradition, eventually collected around 400 AD or so, that were then committed to writing. And in B. Sanhedrin 43a, it actually refers to Jesus as a sorcerer who led Israel astray, which confirms John 19:31 and Mark 3:22, when part of the charge, when the miracles of Jesus were irrefutable before people's eyes, they would say, well, this power comes from Satan. And so even Jesus' enemies, sort of in a backhanded way, compliment that. And even one of the earliest Christians of critic, a man named Celsus, now he wasn't in Jesus' lifetime, but he said, well, the reason why that happened is because Jesus went away to Egypt, studied sorcery, and came back and did magic tricks to fool the Jews. So what I'm saying is, even the enemies of Jesus recognize his miracle-working power.
Okay, I want to answer that real quick.
Well,
The Talmud.
Brett, actually, if you can just hold on to that thought, we are coming to the end of this segment. It's a short one, but we'll have plenty of time on the other end of the break. Backpack Radio. Look forward to talking some more.
Backpack Radio.
Biblical apologetics for the metropolitan mind.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome back to Backpack Radio. Whenever or wherever you're listening, we are glad that you're here. As always, you can find us everywhere on the web, backpackradio.com, on Facebook, on iTunes. You can listen to us on the radio, all sorts of places. And hopefully you're enjoying the show today. We are on with Brett Strong, discussing this question: is the New Testament Jesus fiction? And at the end of the last segment, Vocab gave a couple different quotes from different people speaking of Jesus, attesting, enemies of Jesus, but attesting to him. I think they spoke of him as a sorcerer, a magician, attesting to some of the New Testament accounts concerning Jesus. And Brett, you were going to respond to what the Vocab had said.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that Vocab would bring up the Talmud, because that same Talmud also said that Jesus can be found boiling in feces. So, Vocab, do you believe that too? If you're going to bring up the Talmud as such a reputable source, then do you believe that it also says in that same Talmud that Jesus can be found to this day boiling in feces?
Document that talks about Jesus being in hell, which is a metaphysical thing that they're determining where he would be in the afterlife.
It is feces.
Okay.
Back it up with Price.
No, but I'm saying, yeah. Okay, so making a determination sort of on his afterlife, that's not. I don't see how that has to do with something that he would do within his lifetime historically.
What's part of the Talmud?
Document that is a anti-Christian polemical document by sort of Jewish apologists. But either way, it's not relevant to the fact of things that would happen in Jesus' lifetime.
Well, okay, just speaking of the Talmud, let me change up a little bit. Did you realize that when you study the Talmud, like the Mishnah, the earliest Jewish copies, Jesus is not mentioned? I'm going to quote Johann Meyer, a Talmudic scholar, 1978. This is what he says. While not accepting a full radical approach to Meyer, I think we can agree with him on one basic point. In the earliest rabbinic sources, there is no clear or even probable reference to Jesus of Nazareth. Furthermore, when we do find such a reference in later rabbinic literature, there are mostly probably reactions to Christian claims, oral or written. So here's a scholar saying that there is no reference to Jesus or even probable Jesus of Nazareth in the earliest rabbinic writings, and that when it does appear, it's probably just a reaction to Christians to calm them down. So when you, and here's one more thing I must add to you, Vocab. Do you realize the earliest Talmud commentaries are written by 800 to 100 AD? So you're talking about something, when you quote, it's written almost 1,000 years after Jesus supposedly lived. So your source is something, when you say the Talmud, the earliest copy we have is something written between 100 AD to 1,000 AD. So you're quoting something over almost 1,000 years later.
Yeah, you're talking about our earliest copies.
That's a lot of weakness.
Yeah, you're talking about our earliest copies, but be strong. My argument is not Jesus is in the Talmud, therefore he exists. My point is that even the enemies of Jesus in the Gospels, which are our most reliable records about Jesus, and later on in the Talmud, and people like Celsus mention him as a miracle worker. So I hear what you're saying, but I think, Bob, do you want to transition into something?
Well, our time is running short. So what I'd like to do, Brett, is in my own simple words, sort of summarize the points that you're making, make sure that you agree with them. I'll ask Vocab in a minute's time or two to do the same, and then at that point we'll have to in this debate, not sufficient time, but that's the way we knew that was going to be the case. So, Brett, this is what I heard you say. It may not be complete, but at least in terms of what we've been able to say on the show. Number one is that that there just isn't any evidence, empirical or otherwise, of a Jesus who was a miracle worker. He might have lived and died, but no evidence whatsoever that he did the things as claimed in the New Testament. Is that
no? Almost everything we know about Jesus is from the Gospels.
Okay.
We're talking about the Gospels are triple anonymous. They're undated, unsigned. Where they're written is unknown. It's written in the third person. They plagiarize each other. They eyewitness stuff, impossible eyewitness, like people's miracles.
All right, so you agree with that? You agree with that summary statement then?
What's that you said?
You agree? You agreed with my summary statement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Summary statement 2: miracles by definition cannot happen. That would be something that came also from what you've said, right? Miracles.
Absolutely.
So to some extent, the reason why the Jesus of the Bible can't exist is because no one, including him, could ever do miracles.
Absolutely.
All right, and then.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry too, just because our time is short. Summary statement 3: ancient history, by definition, is unreliable because it's all a hypothesis,
Absolutely.
and cannot be proved.
That's the definition of ancient history: hypothesis.
Okay, and so nothing can be reliable about ancient history at all.
No, even when Christ says, if you want the reliability of even the Civil War, you can't have that with the Bible. You can't have it. So even the Civil War, this was 300 years ago, whatever, even William Lane Craig, the world famous, even had to admit, we're not even talking about that reliability. And I'm quoting him almost verbatim. That's how bad the Bible is. That Bart Ehrman said, if you want to compare it to modern history, you can't say anything about the Bible.
All right, Brett, last question for you, and then I have to turn to vocab. Did the Civil War happen?
No, I believe the Civil War happened.
Okay.
But I'm not a study of the Civil War, so I couldn't give you back that with any firmness like I'm back in the Jesus statement.
You could show some of the pictures from the battlefield or something like that. That'd probably work.
Vocab, you got just a couple of minutes to summarize, either responding to the points that I made that Brett seemed to agree with, or taking it where you want to. You got about 2 minutes.
Yeah, just that there's a lot more we didn't get to cover. So, I mean, for the summary, I just encourage people to go back and listen. But Jesus is thoroughly attested. Not only did we have the New Testament documents, which weren't all collected together at one time. What that means is they're an anthology, a variety of sources they are. And so you have multiple sources in the New Testament documents themselves, all dating within the first century, detailing Jesus' life. Not only that, you have some Christian non-canonical sources, such as the Didache and the Clement of Rome, his letter that I mentioned. And then you have Greek and Roman sources that are in the 2nd century, so not too far, like Pliny the Younger, 112, Tacitus, 115, Suetonius, 120, Marabar, Serapion, Julius Africanus, Lucian of Samosata, Celsus, who I mentioned, Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, not a Greek or Roman source, a Christian as well. But all these sources, and Justin Martyr talks about the Gospels, calls them the Memoirs of the Apostles. You also have Josephus, and if you even don't think the Testimonium Flavianum is correct or accurate, we still have Josephus referring to Jesus when he talks about the martyrdom of James and calls Jesus, or James, the brother of the so-called Messiah. So there's source after source after source. You can learn a lot about Jesus just within Paul's writings. Not a ton, because he's writing epistles, not gospels. But the sources are overwhelming. And I think someone's predisposition to disbelieve miracles, to disbelieve the supernatural, is the only thing that could drive them to such a radical agnosticism about clearly established fact within history.
Okay, with that, guys, Brett, I thank you for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. I just want to say this real quick. When Vocab just ended with a fact, historical fact is hypothesis. So he's just agreeing with me. Whenever Vocab says fact, he's speaking hypothesis. That is the way ancient history is done. So Vocab and everything he said, every information he gave is a hypothesis, because we have no original copy of anything he just said. All of it is hundreds to 1,000 years later. And Vocab knows that, but he won't tell people because he knows it diminishes his case big time. And I'm going to shut up. But I love you, Vocab. And Pastor Bob and Vermont.
Hey, you too. I appreciate your emails and stuff. And I mean, we'd like to have you on again. I mean, I think it's fun interacting with you. I mean, you're you're an interesting combination because you make pretty outlandish statements that could be taken as offensive if you didn't do them in such sort of a charming, zealous, happy way. And so it's pretty fun to talk to you or hear you because you have a good combination of personality. And I also think it's funny and intriguing that you like Christian bands. You mentioned in your email several times you like Third Day and some others. So it's pretty interesting. I just encourage you to check out some Christian hip hop too.
No, I'm not really a hip hop fan in the Christian world, but I do like Michael W. Smith, Chris Tomlin, How Great Is Our God. Those are some awesome music. Listen to it often.
All right, well,
that's great. Well, Brett, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Check out his website, jesusisahoax.blogspot.com. You can read more of his stuff and find out more about him. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks a lot.
God bless, no doubt. Let's go around the horn. I'll let you guys go first because, I did a lot of the talking. Ramon, thoughts after the discussion?
Well,
you're laughing a lot, by the way. People couldn't see, but you had a lot of chuckles.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's because Ramon was thinking nobody from New York and New Jersey could know anything.
So he knows more than your average New Yorker.
Yeah, well, Pastor Bob, as always, you do an excellent job of sort of summing things up because I thought that, I encourage listeners to sort of rewind and listen to what Pastor Bob said because I think that's really the key for me. When you begin to say, basically, there's no such thing, the supernatural cannot exist, miracles cannot exist. I mean, where do you go from there? When you begin to make statements as if, basically, it's almost, he speaks in such absolute terms. There's basically nothing certain we can say concerning ancient history. No one operates that way. Right. No one. In fact, the reality is you can say that even about, quote unquote, the Civil War, anything, even something that happened, let's say, last summer. Yeah. You could say, well, you photoshopped those pictures of you in Florida. You fabricated the emails saying that you were in Florida. You can cast doubt on anything. The reality is, you could, that sort of certainty test, you can put on anything. The question is, given sort of the evidence that's there, does any reasonable person say, well, this actually happened? This actually happened. And I think that's an area, though, it's just he sort of begins in this area. He begins in this at a basic point where he just is unwilling to even follow any of those lines of thought.
Yeah, what I'd want to do if we had another show or more time to ask him, and I'm not expecting that he should have answered this now because I didn't ask him, so I'm not trying to say that, but to ask him, okay, if Jesus didn't exist is the way or any way near similar to the way the New Testament describes him, give us an alternative plausible explanation for the beginnings of Christian history. You could say, okay, it's not that, but you can't just knock down a wall historically. You have to, if you take away the X, you've got to posit something else. Mm-hmm. You've got to put another factor or several factors in there. An alternative explanation for the rock, because what it does is historical hypotheses. They have explanatory power. They have explanatory scope. His version doesn't have any of that, so he need to posit some kind of alternative version of the beginning of Christianity within the first, second century that would help us make sense.
Yeah, that's another thing. A number of things that I'd challenge sort of his understanding of how ancient history is done. He kept on hitting on we have copies. We just have copies, but that's true for everything.
Yeah, we don't have original copies for anything written on paper for hardly anything.
Yeah, so he seemed to, what I learned, he seems to set up a presupposition that no one could possibly solve. You asked the question, do we have fingerprints of anybody? I'm a little confused because even if we had the fingerprints of Jesus, that wouldn't mean he was the miracle worker.
Yeah.
Brett discounts that completely as not a possibility. So the fact that Jesus might have existed doesn't even mean anything. So really nothing means anything to him.
Yeah, it's almost like saying we don't have a picture of Jesus. Well, we don't have a picture of anybody in the first century. Yeah. A photograph. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So,
and the evidence we do have, he finds a way of discounting. So he says the Gospels are just historical fiction. They're just copies, fabricated by other people. But yeah, as you just said, so the history of Christianity, as it started, it's essentially a hoax.
And let's not forget, too, that while I think there are plenty of reliable historical reasons to believe the gospel, it is the role of the Holy Spirit to convince and to convict. And ultimately, none of us are sitting here today as professing Christians, nor any of our listeners, without the work of the Holy Spirit in their life.
Yeah, and that's also ultimately what we pray for Brett, that he would have the inner witness of the Holy Spirit upon his heart as he hears the gospel in these different situations. And I pray that could happen.
And that he can start listening to some Christian hip hop.
Yeah, what's up? A guy from New York that doesn't like any hip hop.
I know.
I mean, that's cool, man. You know, Micah W. Smith. Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
He must be a little older than he sounds, I think.
Yeah.
So, you know,
That's old school.
Or
right
more
there.
sophisticated.
Yeah, you like that stuff, don't you, Bob?
I do.
all right. Well, we don't want to alienate any of our listeners. We better stop now. Okay. Well, yeah. Check out backpackradio.com. And for those who want to see more about Brett, you go to his website, jesusisahoax.blogspot.com. You can actually order his book there. And thank you very much for listening this week, and hope to see you next week, man.
Backpack Radio.